General Bernard Montgomery was never known to smile or joke. If he said something, it was to be taken literally. One of the American generals once found this out the hard way. Montgomery played a crucial role in defeating the Axis forces during World War II, demonstrating exceptional strategic brilliance that rightly earned him recognition. However, his outstanding military abilities were largely overshadowed by his immense self-confidence and complete lack of tactfulness. This man earned a reputation as a difficult personality, and Winston Churchill once remarked that, while he was hard to defeat in battle, it was impossible to endure victory over him. His full name was Bernard Low Montgomery, and he was simply called Montgomery, or Monty. He was born in 1887 in London to a family known for their strictness and religious fervor. His father, Henry, was a minister in the Church of England, and his mother, Maud, was the daughter of a priest. However, Montgomery never intended to follow in his parents' footsteps or to dedicate his life to religion or church service. When Bernard was just 2 years old, his father was appointed Bishop of Tasmania, and the entire family moved to another continent, in Australia. This move was related to his father's ecclesiastical duties and undoubtedly brought significant changes to the boy's destiny. In the new environment and amid frequent separations from his father, who sometimes left the family for several months, Montgomery grew up amid an atmosphere of emotional tension and instability. His mother, forced to raise 8 children alone, experienced considerable pressure trying to balance her roles as mother and homemaker in a foreign, unfamiliar country. When she paid attention to him, it was often accompanied by harsh punishments, typically for seemingly minor offenses, often because she considered him disobedient or defiant. As a result, such disciplinary methods and ongoing family conflicts led Montgomery at a young age to develop a tendency toward aggression and a fear of conflicts. He succeeded in attacking smaller and weaker peers, playing cruel, dictator-like roles. Sometimes he forced a group of boys to walk upstairs or cross a roof with their hands tied together. The family's well-being and peace in Australia ended in 1901 when they returned to London. But the psychological scars remained, and as an adult, Montgomery grew into a rather unpleasant, cheeky, and conflict-prone young man. After some time, he entered the Royal Military College at Sandhurst, where, despite strict supervision and the demanding discipline from the British Army officers, it was still difficult for him to change his character. His behavior was marked by a lack of tact and increasing aggression, which increasingly cast doubt on his future prospects as a military officer. His superiors nearly had to exclude him for his boisterousness and rudeness, which indicated serious behavioral problems, despite the discipline and strict demands of the military environment. Montgomery remarkably managed to survive a long and difficult journey, following orders for enough time to graduate from Regent's College in Sandburn at only 21 years old. His desire to serve and his ambition to prove himself prompted him to seek combat experience as soon as possible. Soon after earning his young officer's diploma, Montgomery actively participated in military clashes in India, and perhaps thanks to his cruelty and uncompromising attitude on the battlefield, he was able to attain the rank of lieutenant. However, true recognition came only during World War I, when fate threw him into the very heart of war's most brutal events, the First Battle of Irrawaddy. During this battle, he was targeted by a sniper, shot once in the right lung and a second time in the knee. Few expected him to survive such injuries. The medics caring for him were so convinced that the only thing awaiting him was a return to Britain in a coffin, that the army had even prepared a coffin for him. However, to everyone's surprise, Montgomery not only survived, but was able to tell what had happened. For his bravery and leadership qualities, he was awarded an order for outstanding service at that moment. After recovering from his wounds, a new fate awaited him. In 1915, despite his early injuries, he went back into battle and continued to display exceptional character and leadership, quickly rising through the ranks to the position of staff officer. By the time the Allies achieved victory, a victory that cost many lives, Montgomery saw the cost as far too high. In his eyes, victory was darkened by the blood spilled on the battlefield, the blood with which he had been intimately familiar since childhood. His mother repeatedly insulted him and subjected him to brutal beatings, so cruelty was by then not foreign to him. Yet the horrors and brutality he faced during the war forever changed his inner world. He sensed that commanders on both sides exhibited complete indifference to human life and the fate of soldiers. The experiences of the First World War permanently shaped his life course. Internally, he found new goals and meaning, realizing that most officers around him demonstrated total incompetence and lack of true resolve. Aspiring to achieve genuine development and higher military ranks in the British Army, he understood that obtaining a good education and changing his mindset were essential. Without influential connections in high circles and the ability to carry out orders precisely from his commanders, it was difficult for him to climb the ranks. His inability to get into the Staff College, a crucial institution for those seeking command positions, seemed to be a serious obstacle. Part 3 of 7. Unexpectedly, a chance invitation to play tennis brought him face to face with his destiny. Under the command of the Chief of Staff, Field Marshal Sir William Robert, he made such a strong impression on the officer that he decided to give him another opportunity to continue his education at the Staff College. As a result, in 1921, Montgomery successfully graduated and was appointed to the rank of brevet major. However, this newcomer's fate was fraught with difficulties. He quickly found himself in a situation that seemed hopeless and was the most challenging of his career. As commander of the 17th Infantry Brigade, he was serving in Ireland, where he was tasked with leading combat operations against Irish nationalists. Faced with such a difficult and seemingly irreconcilable situation, he made the decision to reject all mercy and pacifism. Ireland became Montgomery's first real field for leadership and demonstration of his qualities, and he quickly realized that he was not as invincible and authoritative as he had previously believed. In May 1922, he commanded a sizable force that entered the town of Macrara in an attempt to locate the missing British officers. Hoping that a show of strength would persuade the leader of the Irish Republican Army, Captain Charlie Brown, to surrender his men, Montgomery decided to act decisively. However, Brown, skillfully trapping him, proposed to conduct negotiations at the castle gates. At the same time, dozens of IRA fighters took up firing positions and completely encircled Montgomery and his unit. Brown gave them only 10 minutes to leave the town, after which the officers had no choice but to retreat. During their withdrawal, it was unknown to them that the Irish had already dealt with the missing British officers. It was merely revenge for the countless humiliations and sufferings inflicted by Montgomery in Ireland. Subsequently, he employed a brutal, scorched earth tactic, involving the destruction of houses and violent actions that could be described as barbaric. When his life lacked a command assignment, Montgomery tried to maintain some personal space and find peace, but his fanatic devotion to service in the British Army prevented this. Only by his 34th year, around 1925, was he able to establish some semblance of romantic relationships. His first infatuation was with a 17-year-old girl named Betty Anderson. It seemed that his idea of romantic strolling along the shore boiled down to drawing plans in the sand for the future deployment of troops and armored vehicles. These walks apparently did not leave a lasting impression on the girl, and eventually she rejected his proposal. After several years, at another stage of his life, Montgomery frequently reevaluated his approach to relationships, but romance remained something distant and, rather, unattainable for him. Montgomery met Elizabeth Carver, a widow of an officer in the British Army, whom he had met when she, along with her 2 sons, seemed fully integrated into his life. Even her children initially perceived him as a family-like figure, and it appeared that he had managed to create a truly familial atmosphere around himself. Moreover, Carver's sons later said that it was a very brave act to marry their widow mother. Such was the difficulty and responsibility of that decision. Soon after Montgomery and Elizabeth's marriage, they had a son together, whom they named David. But despite all his efforts, the renowned military leader could not escape the dark shadows of tragedy that threatened him even in the brightest moments. During a vacation in Burnham-on-Sea, Elizabeth was bitten by a mysterious insect, which later led to a severe infection. The doctors were forced to amputate her leg in hopes of stopping the disease from spreading. However, her condition did not improve. Sepsis or septicemia developed, and her health rapidly deteriorated. In the end, all Montgomery could do was hold his dying wife's hand and not let go until she passed away. His heart was torn apart by grief, and he was profoundly devastated by the loss that forever changed his destiny. Out of his mind with sorrow, Montgomery decided to throw himself entirely into work. In the very days after the funeral, he abandoned any hopes for a normal, peaceful life and dedicated himself fully to military service. Soon, his efforts were rewarded with a promotion to brigadier general, and he was sent to mandatory service in Palestine, far from the memories of his deceased wife, to give himself time to recover from the tragedy. There, in a foreign land, the widower decided to vent his grief and rage by suppressing the resistance of local rebels in order to quell the insurrection. Less than a year later, he returned to England, but not as a defeated man, rather as a military leader headed toward a new role. And suddenly, everything changed again. Just a few months after returning home, World War II began in Europe. Montgomery found himself once more in Poland and France, commanding the 3rd Division. His leadership qualities and ability to direct proved indispensable during the initial tense stages of the conflict. While other French divisions were only preparing for defense, he invested all his efforts into training his unit, transforming it into one of the most effective units of the Western Front. He often demanded that drills be conducted at night, despite unfavorable weather conditions and protests from the soldiers. His persistence and hard work saved many lives, and by the time the war escalated, Montgomery's 3rd Division had earned a reputation as one of the best units in the Western Army. The action took place in a complex, highly flexible, and dynamic combat environment, where each moment demanded precision and promptness. Under such conditions, everything was like walking a tightrope, and the person leading the troops needed to be not only tactically clever, but also adaptable in his actions. France, in turn, provided ample room for maneuver, with French forces demonstrating their ability to respond quickly and adapt to the changing situation on the battlefield. At the most critical moment, when partisan squads and the forces of besieged French districts were to support the overall front, British troops appeared on the scene, arriving at the right place and time. The army commanded by Monty found itself exactly where it was needed to ensure the retreat of British forces at Dunkirk. It was during this initial phase of the defense that some of Monty's character traits and personality features became evident. For example, his extraordinary strictness and discipline. He would go to sleep precisely at 9:30 p.m., regardless of circumstances, whether artillery shelling or a lull in the fighting. Before going to bed, he gave his subordinates only one clear and unwavering order: not to disturb him unless a serious emergency arose, requiring immediate intervention. By the year 1940, the situation gradually began to shift in favor of the Allied powers. At this stage, Winston Churchill recognized the need for a new military leader in North Africa, capable of handling the challenges facing the army. Despite his reputation as a resolute and stubborn man, Churchill chose Monty, understanding that only he could elevate the troops to a new level of efficiency. At the same time, in the Sahara Desert on the opposite side, 2 unyielding enemies clashed: British General and German Field Marshal Erwin the Tricky Fox Rommel, who became a symbol of the German military forces in the region. Meeting for the first time in the dusty and harsh conditions of the desert, Monty immediately made it clear that his goal was either to defeat Rommel or to go into eternal battle without taking a step back. His determination was undeniable. He had no intention of retreating or surrendering, even if it entailed taking risks. In the following months, Monty focused on resisting constant German attacks and provocations, aiming to prepare for a decisive battle at the decisive moment. In the eyes of his superiors, however, such persistence appeared as a sign of weakness, and he was viewed with suspicion and doubt. In England, Churchill demanded more active action, but Monty, despite criticism, continued to diligently build up his army, concentrating on strengthening the Eighth Army, which elicited a mixture of admiration and concern from the leadership. In late October 1942, as hopes for a swift victory became ever clearer, Montgomery finally launched his long-awaited counteroffensive. His plan was successful, and after 12 days of intense fighting, known as the Second Battle of El Alamein, the Allies achieved a crucial victory. The losses were significant. Around 14,300 soldiers were wounded or killed. Yet for Montgomery and the entire alliance, this victory marked a turning point that paved the way for a strategic breakthrough. This triumph not only boosted his reputation and demonstrated his competence to the high command, but also symbolized confidence in the forthcoming advance. It was one of the greatest achievements of the land forces since the beginning of World War II, confirming that despite numerous difficulties, the Allies could still attain significant successes. However, the cost of victory was high. During the battles, his stepson, Dick Carver, was captured by the enemy during a reconnaissance mission, dealing a serious blow to Montgomery's personal life. His family left behind was now in enemy hands, and he desperately attempted to leverage his contacts and resources in hopes of rescuing his relative. At one point, it seemed that all efforts were in vain and the outcome uncertain. But fate intervened. Carver managed to escape captivity and return to his commander, providing Montgomery with a brief but profound comfort. Returning home, he was able to regain his composure and happily celebrate Christmas with Montgomery, who in the meantime continued to score victory after victory on the front. His ego grew with each new achievement, becoming increasingly inflated to the point that he eventually no longer fit within the Allies' camp. By the time he was promoted to the rank of foolish general, he found himself surrounded by his American allies, George Patton and Omar Bradley. It was said that the three argued among themselves as fiercely as schoolgirls on the playground, although working with them often turned into a real nightmare. Despite all the difficulties, Montgomery possessed a distinctive, sometimes even gloomy sense of humor, which occasionally manifested in his actions and remarks. In one of the photographs taken in 1944, he is captured alongside his two pets, a terrier named Hitler and a spaniel named Rommel. This image reveals one of Montgomery's unique traits. More than one sense, he was simultaneously a subordinate, or even a prisoner of his own passions and unquenchable ambitions, as if leading both of his canine friends on leashes. Montgomery was known for his haughty demeanor, unpleasant temper, and constant tendencies to boast. At the same time, he exhibited a strange literalness in his judgments and actions. For example, he made a bet with American General Walter B. Smith that he could take the city of Sfax by mid-April 1943. This was more of a joke on his part, and General Smith wagered his response. He promised to hand over a B-17 bomber to Montgomery if he succeeded. Although it was a joke, Montgomery actually took Sfax in early April. He immediately contacted Smith to claim his winning prize. When the general realized it was not a joke, he had to backpedal and turn to Eisenhower. Ultimately, in 1949, reluctantly, he handed Montgomery a fully equipped B-17 bomber. In 1949, his mother passed away, but the winds of change and time did not soften his resentment and hostility towards her. He never forgot her strict style of upbringing. At the age of 62, already a lord, Montgomery chose not to attend her funeral, explaining that he was very busy at the time, as he was still overseeing World War II events. As the head of commands, he held many high-ranking positions, yet he never wielded as much influence as he desired. The fault lay solely with himself and his negative personality. Later in life, he adopted quite contradictory and even controversial views, indicating that he might have already exceeded his usefulness. He publicly supported apartheid in South Africa and spoke out against gay rights. In the end, Montgomery not only demanded strict discipline from his subordinates, but also sometimes became a source of conflicts and problems himself, unable to do without his characteristic stubbornness and arrogance. Throughout his life, he saw himself as a person dedicated to his principles and beliefs. He was an especially devout vegetarian, adhered to strict diets, and was an active follower of the Christian faith. In other words, His worldview and way of life were closely linked to his spiritual and moral values. Over his 88 years, he seemingly took genuine pleasure only from vivid, sometimes memorable battles and confrontations. Perhaps this was his essence, seeking challenges and adventures that energized him and gave him a sense of inner fulfillment. We thank you for your interest in our History channel, where we strive to reveal the most exciting and unusual events of the past. If you appreciate deep and engaging stories about historical events, continue to follow our releases and explore new facts with us. Also, do not forget to visit our main page called Factate, where even more astonishing information about various aspects of human life, events, and facts awaits you. Facts that will broaden your horizons and satisfy your curiosity.